In an ironic twist of fate, it appears that vampires, notorious blood enthusiasts, were actually terrified of the stuff. Yes, you heard it right. Now I know this might be a shocking revelation for some of you. After all, we've spent our entire lives believing that vampires and blood go together like peanut butter and jelly, like Batman and Robin, well, you get the point. But what if I told you that this popular belief is as accurate as a weather forecast by a groundhog, or as reliable as a diet plan from a fast food mascot? It's a bloody misconception, quite literally. You see, historical vampires, the OGs of the night if you will, were actually scared stiff of blood. I mean, they avoided it like a cat avoids a swimming pool filled with cucumbers. I know, it sounds as believable as a unicorn running for president, but bear with me here. Now you might be wondering, but why? Why would these creatures of the night, these supposed bloodsuckers, be afraid of the very thing that's supposed to make them tick? Well, let's just say it's a bit more complicated than a simple fear of liquid red. It's like being afraid of water but being a fish. Sounds weird, right? And this is where it gets interesting. You see, these vampires weren't just afraid of blood, they were downright horrified by it. It would cause them to squeal like a vampire bat in daylight, to flee faster than a werewolf at a silverware convention. It was their kryptonite, their Achilles heel, their big no-no. So, as we take this journey together, prepare yourselves for a few surprises along the way. Because what you thought you knew about vampires might just be turned upside down. It's like finding out Santa Claus is allergic to cookies and milk, or that the Easter Bunny has a fear of eggs. So buckle up as we dive into the world of blood-phobic vampires. It's going to be a bumpy and surprisingly blood-free ride. Our journey begins in the 15th century, where vampires were more into fashion than phlebotomy. Yes, you heard that right. When they weren't busy perfecting their smoky eye makeup or debating the merits of velvet versus silk, these vampires had little interest in blood. In fact, they were more likely to attend a garlic festival than to sip on some blood. Imagine for a moment, a vampire standing in line at the city's biggest garlic fest, drooling over the sight of garlic bread, garlic fries, and, oh, the piece de resistance, garlic ice cream. I know it's a bit hard to digest, but so is garlic ice cream, isn't it? Now, you might be asking, but what about all those stories of vampires sucking blood? Well, I'm glad you asked. You see, most of those stories were actually misinterpretations. Quite like when you misinterpret your mom's "take out the trash" as "take out the cash." It's an easy mistake to make, right? In reality, vampires were more into self-care and personal grooming, much like the Kardashians of the 15th century, but without the reality TV show and the constant social media updates. Blood, for them, was more of a fashion faux pas. It clashed with their outfit, stained their teeth, and let's not even get started on the dry cleaning bills. Some tales even suggest that vampires considered blood to be a bit passé. It was so last century, like powdered wigs or wooden dentures. Instead, they were more into chai lattes, vegan pastries, and yoga. Yes, yoga. Imagine a vampire doing the downward dog as the sun rises. Breathtaking, isn't it? So if they weren't chugging blood, what were these fashion-forward vampires doing? Let's find out. Turns out, vampires were more into late-night poetry and moonlit strolls than midnight snacks of the bloody kind. Yes, you heard it right. Historical vampires were the cultured elites of their time, not the bloodthirsty beasts we often picture them as. These fanged aristocrats of yore were more likely to be found in a candlelit library devouring a sonnet by Byron than lurking in a dark alley waiting for a hapless victim. They were the original night owls, but instead of hooting, they were reciting Shakespearean sonnets, their ethereal voices echoing through the stillness of the night. Vampires, my dear friends, were the original patrons of the arts, the unsung heroes of the Renaissance. They were the ones who commissioned the works of the great masters. Ever wondered why Mona Lisa has that mysterious smile? Well, it's because she was painted by a vampire who told her a really good knock-knock joke. It's a little-known fact, but vampires were the original stand-up comedians. And what about their nocturnal activities? Well, they were not prowling the streets for fresh blood. No, they were too busy hosting soirees and moonlit balls. Their parties were the talk of the town, or more accurately, the talk of the graveyard. You haven't lived until you've attended a vampire's party. I mean, you haven't unlived until you've attended a vampire's party. They were also avid gardeners, planting roses by the light of the moon. Their gardens were the envy of all, full of night-blooming flowers. Why, you ask? Because they believed that moonlight was the best fertilizer. And who could argue with such logic? So the next time you imagine a vampire, picture a sophisticated creature of the night, a connoisseur of arts, a lover of poetry, a host of grand parties, and an ardent gardener. Not a creature of darkness and blood, but a creature of moonlight and roses. Who knew vampires were so cultured? Certainly not Hollywood. But why were vampires so scared of blood? Was it the color, the smell, the taste? Now let's dive into the potential reasons why our fanged friends might have been afraid of the red stuff. It's time to explore some theories that are as absurd as a vampire with a sunbathing hobby. First off, we can't rule out squeamishness. Yes, you heard it right. Maybe vampires were the original faint-hearted folks. Imagine a vampire at the sight of blood, fainting into their coffin, cape dramatically flung over their face. Then there's the possibility that vampires were simply trying to watch their iron intake. Picture this, a vampire nutritionist, with a clipboard and a stern expression, advising a vampire client, "Remember Vlad, we're cutting back on iron-rich foods, that means no blood." Could it be that vampires were just really picky eaters? Maybe blood was the vampire equivalent of Brussels sprouts, and they were all secretly wishing for a nice, juicy steak instead. Or perhaps they were all following the vampire version of a vegan diet. No blood, just a nice glass of tomato juice at mealtimes. Perhaps it was a case of hemophobia, the fear of blood. After all, vampires are known for their dramatic flair. Maybe they saw a little blood and thought, "Oh no, I can't possibly, it's just too macabre." Or here's a wild idea, maybe vampires were just really into personal hygiene. Blood is notoriously hard to get out of clothes, especially when your wardrobe consists mostly of black capes and formal wear. They might have thought, bloodstains? Not on my watch. The world may never know why vampires had such a complicated relationship with blood, but one thing's for sure, they definitely weren't lining up to donate at the blood bank. As we close our journey into the bloodless world of vampires, it's clear that these creatures were less Twilight and more Downton Abbey. Yes, my friends, we have delved deep into the heart, or rather, the lack of a beating heart, of the vampire mythos and have come to a startling revelation. Vampires, those nocturnal beings of lore renowned for their penchant for the crimson life force, were in fact quite squeamish when it came to blood. It's a paradox as delicious as garlic-infused sunlit steak, isn't it? Throughout our journey, we've debunked the popular belief that vampires were these suave, bloodthirsty creatures of the night. Instead, we've painted a picture of a vampire more akin to a refined, cultured, and dare I say, a somewhat anemic aristocrat. They were more likely to be found discussing philosophy or playing the harpsichord than prowling the night in search of a juicy neck. We've also explored the fear factor, or rather, the fear of the splatter that these creatures harbored. It's hard to maintain an image of sophisticated elegance when you're covered in blood splatter, isn't it? It's a fashion faux pas even the most fashion-forward vampire wouldn't dare to commit. So as we wrap up, let's remember that the vampires of yore were not the blood-crazed monsters that popular culture makes them out to be. They were simply misunderstood creatures of the night with a refined palate, a flair for the dramatic, and an inexplicable fear of blood. So next time you're watching a vampire flick and the fanged protagonist goes for the jugular, remember, real vampires prefer a good book and a moonlit stroll over a bloody feast any day. Now isn't that a bloody good twist?